We had some early success, which carried us through any doubts that the head of A&R, Lenny Warrenker, and the chairman of the board, Mo Austin, may have had. And, you know, like a lot of people, when you sit down and explain what you have in mind and it makes sense, then they say, well, hell, that sounds great to us. We're going to get a better record. And we want to have a long-term arrangement with you, so go ahead and keep 20 songs in the can. So we always had a nice well to draw from. It's a richer approach to recording. Well, every record, I hope, is different in some way. I mean, even after we were successful, I didn't just repeat whatever. I didn't say, well, oh, that was successful, let's just keep doing that forever. The first records we did, we used Elvis's band. And then John Denver took them. So we had to put something else together. And at that point, I said, look, if you're going to put together a touring band, which you would then dismantle before you go in the studio with professionals, why not put together a touring band that you can record with, so that you don't have to do the dismantling, and you don't have to make a bunch of studio musicians sound like the band you've been on the road with for the last year. Why not merge the two concepts? I was spending a lot of time making records in Toronto with Anne Murray. I made 10 albums with her. I started spending a lot of time in the studio, and experimenting became expensive. And I thought, what if I had my own studio? I could pay for it with projects, plus spend as much time as I wanted to develop my craft and get better at what I was doing. I sat up one night in bed with this vision of a mobile unit. So as soon as the sun rose, I ran out and gathered all the plywood and cardboard I could from the neighborhood and got up on my garage in Rosedale in Toronto and actually whipped together what I thought would be a good working environment in the restraints of a semi-trailer, which is 8 feet by 40, 42, I think. And I walked around in it and bumped into a few things and changed it, and that was it. And then I brought an architect over, a young guy, and I said, you draw this before the wind blows it down. And he drew it, and I went about building it. Most studios spend a lot of time and money dealing with electromagnetic interference, and so I lined it with lead. It's like a really heavy tin foil that I sandwiched between 2 layers of plywood. And it had a 13-foot overdub room in it, with headphones that swung down from the ceiling and microphone booms that swung down from the ceiling, so nothing was underfoot, which automatically made it a larger room. And we made a lot of hit records in there. The first hit that came out of there was a song that I did with Anne Murray called You Won't See Me. They told me there were about more than 40 gold and platinum albums came from that vehicle. Well, I picked songs that I liked. There were a lot of parameters. Songs that I liked, songs that had been successful, if not on the charts, the Billboard charts, or on radio play charts, successfully endorsed by our peers, and songs that I knew would bloom in this surround sound environment, which is totally different from stereo. I evaluated the surroundability of each previously recorded song by playing the stereo 2-channel CD through a cheap old Technics receiver I have in my workshop downstairs. And I've got 4 Oratone loudspeakers set up there, and which are an excellent tool for discernment of mid-range frequencies. I would play each song through this receiver, which has a button on it that says surround sound. It separates the ambient material from the boring central material and throws that on the back speakers. So it gives you a sense of what's possible if you were to take that song and mix it in surround sound. If I was on the fence about which song to pick, I would play them both through this device, and it would be apparent to me which one would bloom more in surround sound. I came up with a moving bass line, which was executed by Glenn D. Harden on a Rhodes electric piano, I think, or a Wurlitzer. And I think Ray Pullman also moved the bass part in harmony with the electric piano part. And it made the song different. It made it different. It changed it from a folk song to something else. And it made everybody else play different. It made it move differently instead of just being a folk song, you know. Donovan and I were working on this song, and what we do is we load 24-track tape, 8 tracks at a time, into the computer, and he listens to make sure they sound great, and then moves on. And he ground to a big halt when this particular track came up, because it was a very delicate, quiet harp track, and the recording of the harp was compromised by a lot of violins. Donovan couldn't figure out how those two microphones or whatever got together on the same track. So luckily I was in the house and wandered in and said, by the way, I intentionally recorded that harp in the dining room part of the L-shaped house, so that rather than a separate room, so that I would get a distance recording of the strings being spilled through the house into the harp microphone. And we'll play you this dastardly harp track now.
Will you really I really wasn't familiar with what surround sound was, but Brian was very excited about it. I've always trusted his sonic instincts. And so we set about to work on this project, and he called me and said, I want you to come over and hear something that I've been working on. And it was Boulder to Birmingham, which was one of the first things that we recorded back in 1974. So it was really astonishing to hear the subtlety and the beauty of it, to be able to hear every instrument, but in a natural way. There was nothing sort of clever about it. It was taking sound to the best possible place, which I suppose is the way you would hear music if you were standing in the middle of a room and you were surrounded by the people who were making the music and singing the music. So I was very excited about it.
We were recording a song called Too Far Gone, and I usually sit with each musician and explain the chord chart I've written for each one. Sometimes it's the same one, sometimes it's a different piece of paper for a different musician, because there's specific things I want them to do. But I don't write out every note that I want them to play, just certain notes in certain places that I consider important to my arrangement. So I was sitting with James Burton and explaining to him how I wanted to start with a lower inversion on the guitar, and then when the steel comes in lower down, that he has to move up to make room. And we were working on that, and this song that I'd heard on the way over came into my head, an Elvis song, I heard it the night before, then on the way over, probably both, otherwise it wouldn't have stuck in my head the way it did. Anyway, there was a guitar lick on that song, and I thought it fit perfectly. It just popped into my head when I was sitting with James. And I asked him to play it, and he did.
One night with you is what I...
It sounded like Elvis playing. There it was. We were recording a song called Leaving Louisiana in the Broad Daylight. And it was kind of an escape song, right, Donovan? So I had this vision of some, in this case, I guess, Emmy, running through a swamp, you know, as fast as she could. And at the time I think we had a new child, and there were baby bottles everywhere. So I took one, and I wanted that sound, but this sounded a little small, so we sped up the tape and recorded this. And when the tape was replayed at normal speed, this became much larger. And of course there were two of them, so it sounds like two giant feet making a getaway through a murky, deep, ugly swamp.
There ain't no way to stop the water.
Certain songs that had an enormous staying power for me as an artist, songs that I still perform today and feel kind of like something is missing if I don't perform them, such as Poncho and Lefty, which was a really, I think, a very important song for me as an artist, as an interpreter, you know, to be able to kind of bring that song to an audience. That's when you feel you've kind of reached your peak as an interpreter.
This song, Poncho and Lefty, stood out for me. It just seemed really a distinct composition from everything else that at least was going on around us at the time we were making this record, so back then. So, and it seemed like the best of his songs. And I thought, okay, if you're looking at a body of work, why don't you pick the best one, especially if it suits the artist, and that's the way you make your decision. There's a Beatles song called Fool on the Hill, and I became enchanted by the bass harmonica that was used by George Martin as an effect on that song called Fool on the Hill. So when Mickey Raphael, the harmonica player from Willie's band, came into the studio to do a few overdubs for me, I asked him to go buy a bass harmonica and learn to play it. And he brought it in, and you can hear it on this song. There's a dirge part of the song at the end where they're carrying him up on a hill in the sun, in the morning sun, and putting him in the cold clay. And because of the manly outlaw aspect of this song, Waylon was brought in to sing a duet with Emmy, and Waylon sang that stuff really well. And to complement both the cowboy outlaw thing and Waylon's manly voice, I came up with this vintage 6-string guitar bass sound. And And Donovan will play a few bars of that now.
And the letter he wrote to his kinfolk to tell him where he'd been. And we shipped it out to Mexico along with his mandolin.
Beneath Still Waters was, I think that was the first time that Emmy got in touch with the low range of her voice, the contralto part. I paid tribute to that by putting that performance, that track, on one of the back speakers when I mixed it in surround sound, so that it would be featured and discernible as a special contralto event.
And this time it's me, and I cry alone beneath still waters. Your love is gone.
This song, Sorrow in the Wind, was being worked up by Emmy and Sharon and Cheryl White. And I decided to get that into the truck so that I could be close to them. You know, I was about 8 feet away from them at the most, and they were all in this 13-foot room, and it was a very intimate environment.
Sorrow in the Wind was always one of my favorite songs. I love the beauty of the words. I love the way we recorded it with Sharon and Cheryl White.
Very interesting sound. I've got Emmy sort of front center and Sharon back and Cheryl back over each shoulder. So you've got Emmy in front of you and the two white ladies singing over each shoulder. And as the song proceeds, more white girls appear, and these are overdubbed vocals that are doubled, and they move out in a kind of a corona, a vocal corona, and then the reverb moves out, and the whole song kind of expands.
I just think there's a certain almost mystical quality to it, and being a bit of a Luddite about sound, I really didn't know what surround sound was, but I had a feeling that something as spare and as empty and full of beautiful harmonies would work in that format, and I think I was right.
When we're apart, my darling, sweet sorrow in the wind. We're apart, my darling, there's sorrow in the wind. When we're apart, my darling, sweet sorrow in the wind, sweet sorrow.
When I was young, I used to go to dances and gymnasiums and dance halls, musty old places, and the band would show up. I'd get there early to watch them. The band would show up with cardboard music stands that they'd unfold on stage with the name of the group on front, and they always had that musty smell, and I tried to create that smell with Last Cheater's Waltz. In fact, I remember there'd be a section with these bands, like there'd be two fiddle players or two sax players, and when the right moment came, they would rise from behind the cardboard music stands to play an important passage or a solo. So I had that vision when Ricky Skaggs plays his 6-fiddle solo section on it. And here's the chart I wrote for Ricky Skaggs, by the way, who played a great part in this song. I think he played 6 fiddles, and he had several different toned fiddles, and we used to call one Mr. French and the other one Mr. Goat. That's how we identified him in the studio. You're really going to like what he did in this song. Last Cheater's Waltz, that's the effect I wanted to get, and I wanted to be able to smell the sawdust and the cardboard music stands. And at the end of the song, most songs either just end or they have a fade. To humanize it kind of, I give it what I call armpits. When it came to the end, I switched from electric bass to acoustic bass. I wanted to do something different with this. I wanted to sonically shrink it from that big sawdust dance hall sound down to basically a parlor in a house, and I did that by having all the instruments peter out. The last chorus of the song, I snuck in some mandolins, but I didn't use a bluegrass mandolin player. I used Albert Lee, an Englishman who plays great electric guitar, and some acoustic, but I wanted his hands on the bluegrass instrument to make it different, more like an Italian tremolo part. And as the song ends, a couple of really old-timey sounding 6-string banjos take over. The expanse available to us sonically was far greater. I decided to overdub a parlor sounding kind of banjo. I have this banjo here that was made for me to order. I had them take an antique body and strip away all the resonating stuff. And it's got an ebony antique guitar neck. I think that's an original Orville cymbal, pre-Gibson. But it's a beautiful feeling instrument and sounds great. And it's kind of what I did on the record. And they come out of the back rear speakers. And then an acoustic bass, which is a bass I played called an Ernie Ball bass. It's shaped like a giant guitar. Spanish guitaron, which is but it's an American version. It's got like a Fender precision neck on it, and just a big, real good sounding body that Ernie Ball designed. You've got these 2 old banjos strumming and an acoustic bass. A single violin as opposed to the huge 6-fiddle thing we had done earlier in the song. And even then it doesn't fade. These guys just play in the parlor until they get tired of it and they gently end. That's what you're about to hear.
See how he holds her as the band plays the last Cheater's Waltz.
Emmylou Harris and Johnny Cash were in the same neighborhood at the same time. So I booked a studio called Quad and worked with a really good engineer named Gene Eichelberger. And we did a live off-the-floor version of Old Rugged Cross with John and Emmy singing and Emmy playing rhythm guitar. And we kind of just put it away and forgot about it because it was very rough and crude and there wasn't much we could do about it at the time. But when this project came up, and projects like this, you're always looking for secret tracks, and I had a pack rat payoff, I call it. I dug out this old tape and we baked it for 8 hours at 128 degrees and loaded it into a computer and manipulated it so that there was a relatively consistent tempo under Johnny Cash's voice. And then Emmy came over and redid her rhythm guitar part to that tempo, and then she sang a civilized low contralto harmony with John. And her original high harmony comes in at the very end.
I always was jealous of the beautiful hymns like Old Rugged Cross, and always secretly wanted to sing that song. Never got a chance in church, but it was even better to save it and sing it with John. You know, you go in to record something with Johnny Cash, and it would almost be a crime if you didn't do something else, even if it never did see the light of day, just the opportunity to put something down on tape for posterity.
Then he'll call me someday to my home far away, where his glory forever I'll share. So I'll cherish the old rugged cross till my trophies at last I lay down. I will cling to the old rugged cross.
And now, the rabbit. When I first heard our music recorded and played back at 24-bit 96,000 cycles per second, I was very impressed, and simultaneously had a realization that every automobile being built had 4 loudspeakers. And at that point, my surround sound adventure was underway. What I like about surround sound is every day is different. I could do this for the rest of my life and never get bored.